All right, everybody, welcome back to GCC's podcast. We're calling this little series In Color Commentary. At least that's what I'm calling it. I decided that just not too long ago. But hey, thank you for coming back to view this, to join us, to listen to us. If you're watching, we are so sorry. Not much to look at. But if you're listening, I'm also sorry. We're only going to be in this episode for about 2 hours, we promise. No, but the last episode was really cool because this series we're touching on a lot of things that I don't have a whole lot of life experience in these traditions that come out of the season of Lent. And so I think that we had a lot of really good conversation. I hope that you guys enjoyed the conversation and felt like you were part of that, could relate to it. But this week we're going to talk about prayer and silence. So silence is about being comfortable with being alone. At least that's what Sheldon said. But I feel like silence isn't just a struggle amongst Christians, but for all of us, why does our society have, I think that we have a fear of silence maybe, or like a very strong uncomfortability with being silent. So maybe where does that come from? Is that a human thing? Is that an American thing? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of what we talked about with Donnie's first one, it's hard for us to understand feasting and fasting because there's very little delineation between those things in our culture.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Like we are an all feast culture all the time. And so we're like, fasting? What do you mean? Silence, I would argue that the greatest spiritual discipline is the practice of prayer. It's something that we see Jesus constantly doing, and he's spending time to be alone, and I would argue verging on loneliness. I think if you want to understand silence, you've got to kind of be okay getting not just alone, but almost lonely. And I think we've talked about this idea of practice through subtraction. I think in church we're so good at like, okay, here are the 5 things you do. So every time we preach on prayer, it's like, okay, so this is what you do when you pray.
Mm-hmm.
This is what you should say when you pray.
Yeah.
And we're not good at when was the last time you guys went and heard a sermon on, hey, so next time you pray, I want you to ask God in 30 seconds for everything you want, and then I want you to sit there for 30 minutes and just be still. Even though every one of us has that be still and know that I am God, that we walk by at a furious pace yelling at our kids every day. Okay, got it, But the reality is that I think that it's the same way that you can't really understand feasting until you understand the community of breaking a feast with a meal.
Yeah.
We don't even sit down, for meals. We don't take time to pray. Prayer is a laundry list. We got to get our 3 thank yous in. Yep. Okay, thanks for the day. Thanks for my family. Thanks for this, Starbucks coffee. And you would never say thanks for the Starbucks.
It's of the devil.
Of the devil. Okay,
he's not a Starbie.
Thank you for.
Sorry, all the Starbies out there.
Tea, I don't know. but the reality is you would say, we say the 3 thank yous, then it's like, okay, this is what I need you to do, God. I need you to bless this person and heal this person and give me this and give me that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then we're like, check, did you pray? I really did pray today. And I'm just waiting on God. If he could just step up, that'd be great. The practice of silence, I mean, we see this in prophets, in the prophets, we see this in the practice of the life of Jesus. Prayer is actually probably, I would argue, so the way that I would say it is this way. So if there's 2 players, there's you and there's God, which one do you think should talk most?
You.
Yeah, clearly me.
Right.
I mean, because
you have so much to say.
Right. But I think we do. And that is maybe part of the problem is that when we approach, if I ask somebody, what does it mean to pray? They would give you a definition of how to do prayer.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at some level that is what prayer is, right? Call on the name of the Lord and, present yourself and offer thanksgiving. And we can find rationalizations for all these things. Even Jesus is like, look, when you pray, starts with God and then it's with, we get it all. But the kind of prayer that you find in spiritual discipline, and there's something even called contemplative prayer. If you read up on this, again, you can Google it. It's there. It's about finding this great silence in the midst of, this is why in monastic movements, silence is such a big thing, because how can we hear from God if we're never listening?
Yeah.
How can we hear from God if we're always talking or we're
so
always
really, we are just
noise?
we don't like to contemplate.
Well,
Yeah.
I think it's deeper than that. You know, you asked the question, Billy, why does our society have a fear of silence? I think it's all of us, and it's because it's unnatural. We live in this fast-paced, hyper-connected world of today. We've got this constant stimulation that's always around us. You know, we're always looking at our phones, or we're always looking at the TV, or we always got somebody talking to us, you know, and it's just constant. And if you take that away, then the effect is incredibly jarring to our senses. We're not used to sitting in silence. We're not used to the spiritual discipline of praying and then sitting back and listening. You know, we got to get our never-ending shopping list in with God, you know, and just sit there and wait for him to Instacart us, you know, with everything everything that's coming back. But when we sit in silence, then we've got to confront everything about ourselves. We've got to confront our thoughts. We've got to confront our insecurities, you know, and it's like, well, I'm supposed to be talking to God. This is what I'm supposed to be doing through prayer right now. No, sometimes sitting there silent, listening is better.
Well, silence is not just about being quiet. It's about ridding our minds of the things that bring us anxiety, and other things as well. If we were in church, if somebody said, "Hey, I'm going to come to your office," or on our calendar, you walked by my little window at the desk, and I'm just sitting there with a candle in the darkness for an hour, we would immediately think, well, Sheldon's just being really ineffective today. And if somebody said, "What were you doing?" Well, I was just praying and waiting for the Spirit and listening to God. And they go, "So you weren't like writing your sermon or doing something?" So I don't know. I mean, it's.
Well, there's also that component, I think, kind of piggybacking off what Brian said, is like, imagine you have a toolbox, and when we're in silence and all of the anxiety, all of the muck of our life rises to the surface, we don't know what to do with it, so we look in our toolbox, and basically the only tool we have is distraction. And then we get really uncomfortable because we can either use the tool and not grow, and that's usually what we do most often, or then we can just kind of sit in the uncomfortability, and then that can be, again, fearful. Like, it's terrifying.
When the kids are getting too loud, just turn the TV volume up, right?
Yeah.
I don't do that at all.
But let's talk about the reality of that, though, is that we don't actually have opportunities for silence. If you tell somebody that is in the thick of it with kids, I don't have 5 minutes to myself, that can be a very daunting thing as well, because I think we yearn we often say, I need peace and quiet. And so maybe the reason why we don't have peace is because we're not intentionally seeking some of the other as well, or creating room for that for each other.
And being in a season where I do have 3 kids, and not often having like what I felt like was the normal time to have peace and quiet. Instead, I just realized, like, hey, before it was just kind of like a clean slate, and I could get that whenever I wanted, and it wasn't like I had to choose to foster that into my priorities. And it's either going to come by waking up 30 minutes earlier, or it's going to come by staying up 30 minutes later. And I battle with that all the time, where it's like, right now, do I need more sleep, or do I actually need like this intentional, conscious peace and quiet? Because sometimes I would just justify it with myself and be like, well, sleeping is my peace and quiet, but like when I'm sleeping, like I'm not thoughtful, I'm not mindful, I'm not being intentional about that pathway that we talked about in the last episode, about getting on this pathway where God is very frequently going down the path and encountering him on that path. So how are ways that I can, in this season, how can I be more intentional? And some of that is actually sacrificial. Like, hey, am I sacrificing a half hour sleep either in the morning or in the evening? But because the value of this silence is so good, like that's something that I still try to get. But one thing I really like that you said, because it's very convicting for me, is at the beginning you said Sheldon, you believe the most important practice, discipline is prayer. Would you include Bible study, and I use quotes, would you include like scripture as one of those practices?
Well, the Bible has a lot of prayers. Even in the sermon, I didn't reference like 25 prayers because I didn't want people to focus on the prayer. I wanted them to focus on the theology of the concept of it. So it's a little Bible anemic, like scripture anemic thing. But I think that what you see is if ever you spend time, like when Jesus goes into the desert for 40 days, he's not reading his Bible. I mean, it doesn't have, you know, he's spending time in bringing himself away.
Mm-hmm.
Prayer is not about asking. Prayer is about being. It's about being in the presence of God. And what we've done is we've said prayer is when you ask God for things. And that's a very small piece of prayer. And the Bible tells us we should do that, and we should engage that. We should always be talking to God. And by the way, if we forget the words, the Spirit will help us remember the words, or He'll just take and go, "Oh, that, you know, you blubbered through that last part, but I know what you mean. I'll give it to God." But it's so much deeper than that, and there's a reason why we see Jesus doing this. I mean, his disciples, it's always ironic. He plays hide and seek with them all the time, probably because he's annoyed with them most of the time. And they're always, and when they come and they see him, they're not like, "Hey, that looks really cool. Teach us how to do that." What do they always do? They're like, "There's some people that want to see you, and some people that need something from you. Can you just?"
They're like,
finish up what you're doing.
What are you doing? Come back.
Right. And sometimes prayer is that, but it's tied to the presence of God. It's tied to being in the presence of God, which we would argue, I think most people would say, the greatest person you could be around, the greatest thing that you could do is be in the presence of God. That's what heaven is. Heaven is about being in the presence of God. This is Eden. They have the presence of God.
Right.
And we have lost that, and we've turned the presence of God into a task. If you want to see a marriage go bad, just turn it into a list of tasks, and you can do all the right things.
Yep.
And your partner says, "But I don't feel like we know each other." But I take out the trash, and I clean, you know, I pack the kids' lunches, and I do all these things. And I think people are just missing that other side of it. And most church fathers, or even monastics and this is why in monastic movements you have times of praying, you have times of silence, you have times of doing those things. It's a value that we don't have anymore.
Well, I think it's even, this might be recency bias, but I think it's even more difficult today because you have the introduction of what we could call like the attention economy, which is companies spending billions and billions of dollars to get you to keep scrolling. Like about a month ago, I had this come to a head moment where I desired the peace and quiet. I desired silence. We have a son. It's nap time. And I go, I'm going to pray. Like I'm going to read scripture. I'm going to be in silence. And then all of a sudden I'm like, I want to check up on my friend who I was just talking to last week on social media. And then next thing you know, I've scrolled reels for the next hour.
Doom scrolling. Yep.
Yes.
There it is.
And we think we can beat it by just going, I'm just not going to get on my phone. And it's like, also, they spend billions of dollars figuring out how your mind works. So it's even, I would argue, sometimes more difficult today, being hyper-connected, to where you intentionally have to say, maybe I'm deleting social media off my phone for X amount of time or indefinitely or whatever it might be. But where in the past it might have been just, I'm going to walk away for a moment and all I can hear is the birds. Now it's buzz. Or like the bell, whatever goes off. And the next thing
so would ancient doom scrolling be spending too much time in scripture and not enough time?
Too much reading and not enough being?
Could be. I mean, I think that we also spend a lot of our time in kind of the wrong area or the wrong discipline of these things. I've never heard anybody say, I was yelling at the kids on the way to soccer practice, and I was like, Lord help me, and that was the moment my life just changed. Like I just the heavens opened. I mean, I would ask us in this: when is a time that you remember that you really stepped into the heart of prayer? And it's mostly a fleeting thing. It's not something that we're like, every day I just, spend this time doing this. But think about ourselves and how we have been changed by a moment with God. Why do we seem to encounter God way more on vacation at the beach?
It forces you to get quiet. I mean, it's a moment where you're sitting with your thoughts and you don't have the task list that's really staring you in the face. So you're able to kind of quiet yourself and be silent in that moment and approach it from that attitude. And I think that some people are, and it's interesting that we talk about this when it comes to silence. Some people are afraid of it. They're afraid to step into that moment and afraid to really
why do you think that is? I mean, why do you think it is?
Well, because I've been there, and I'm afraid to do that because that's when I start thinking about all the things that I really didn't want to think about.
Yeah,
that's half the reason why you doom scroll, is because you don't want to critically think about something that's causing tension in your life and your relationships, and something that you're wrestling with about yourself.
So let's run with that a little bit.
Yeah.
So we avoid silence to push back the things that we really don't want to think about.
Yep.
Because if we just keep them far enough away for long enough, then they'll just go away and
They're
heal
just gonna go
themselves.
away. And they don't.
So what does silence do then as a spiritual practice? So walking on the path and actually allowing those things in, how would that be transformed if we took moments to be silent?
You're forced to confront it. I mean, you're forced to come face to face with those things and really deal with them rather than sweep them under the rug.
And it is a painful moment, but I think of the idea of surgery, where when you go under the knife, the scalpel, if you will, you're getting, to be crass, like you're getting cut open, and that's painful. There's like a pain in surgery, but it's through that painful process that healing comes.
So, but we're asleep. That's what we want. We want to be asleep.
We want to be asleep, but it does. So then you could tag that to then maybe the physical therapy afterward, where you're forced to confront. Okay, I'm healing, and I'm not going to be able to walk right unless I do this. And you have to confront that your knee or your hip isn't what it was 15, 20 years ago. Now you're rebuilding.
I would argue this. So Haley, she taught me something really powerful a long time ago that just sort of happened in my brain. I had a bad incident with my back one time. Billy, you were in the office it's a whole thing. There's a video on YouTube
At
about
first
it.
I was laughing, and then I realized this is not good.
Yeah.
Is that when you made a bet on the driveway?
No.
Oh, okay.
This wasn't when I stepped
Was
on the
that
gas.
Brian's first day? Is that what you're talking about?
It
The
was-
staff
It was
Christmas?
somebody- I
Yeah.
just didn't want to be around these guys. I was like, how can I get out of the staff event?
Yep.
Yeah, the staff Christmas.
It was
Yeah.
Christmas
It was.
luncheon.
It was.
Yeah.
But I went to the hospital, and I had to be in the hospital for a couple of days. It just was it was just kind of a big thing. And I remember that they would come in and they give you the smiley face, like, okay,
Yeah.
are you frowny face? Are you right, over here, which is pretty good. But at the end of the day, they were like, what is your pain level? And I'd be like, oh, it's like a 7 or 8 or 9, like it's high. The question that
9 is like usually childbirth, right?
Yeah, I was.
You're there.
I was
I'm
up there.
Mhm.
But the one thing that was interesting is one of the nurses, she said, what would you like your pain to be? And I said, I don't know, like a 3 or a 4. And she kind of stopped in that moment, and she said, why do you say that? I said, because I'm going to be realistic. She said, that, and this is something that Haley kind of helped me with, because what we go in is if we're at an 8 or 9, if you ask somebody, what do you want your pain level to be? They say, I want it to be a 0. Which is the number one reason why people that go in for surgery get addicted to pain pills, because they're like, well, I took 2 and now I'm at a 4, so I guess I need to take another 2 to be at a 0. That's not the goal. The goal is not to feel no pain. I mean, this is the same as the suffering thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we think is, I don't want to confront these things or something in my life because I want it to go from an 8 to a 0, because I'm not comfortable to say, hey, if I spend time in silence, it's still going to be there, but it's going to go to a 6 or a 5 or a 4. So I think it's like, well, I prayed to God. God didn't just immediately take it away. I'm not a 0 now. So clearly God hates me and my prayers don't work. And this whole Christian thing is a myth. We haven't understood that the path of suffering is the path of healing. It's like we want to have the surgery and get the new knee and then go and run the Boston Marathon the next day.
Yeah.
You've got recovery and rehab and
Yeah.
long
Training.
process that's
it's
not
a long process.
pain-free.
Yeah, silence is the surgery.
Right.
Hey, be silent. God's going to just cut you open, and then you're going to know where to go.
Well, and one thing that I thought about is when I was in more intensive, like not like when I say intensive therapy, I was going to therapy like once a week for a series of maybe like 4 to 5 months. I was experiencing a lot of anxiety, and some of that was revolving around like I had a lot of very unique and new stress, but I was also dealing with what I thought was like chest pain. But it turned out, like even going to a cardiologist doing like a stress test, what everything turned out to be was just, hey, sometimes extreme amount of stress can actually show itself through like muscular and skeletal pain. So nothing had to do with like my actual like cardiovascular system. But so when I was in therapy, one of the things that my therapist would, an exercise that I would do is he would say like, okay, you're experiencing anxiety. And I would almost role play in my heart and my mind and like, hey, let's picture anxiety as like a person. and I'd have a conversation with the anxiety. And I'm like, what am I doing? Like, why would I be doing that? And he's like, well, when you have anxiety, like it's there trying to tell you something about you.
Mm-hmm.
And so get close to anxiety. Most people push the anxiety away and they avoid it.
Right.
But when you get close to it, it doesn't necessarily increase the anxiety, but you will understand it. And when you understand the anxiety, then you can start to not just manage it, but you can process through it, because it's almost like the smoke detector going off in your heart and in your mind. Like, hey, something's wrong. Like, I'm calling your attention to it, but you can't turn a smoke detector off when you're far away. You got to get close, hit it, and then it's telling you something in your environment is going on, and you have to like do something about it.
Right.
And so many times, like I think that's what we're afraid of is, hey, in the silence, you're more likely to see something that's going on in your life that like the smoke detector's going off.
Silence
for.
gives
And,
you space.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think people aren't afraid of the silence. They're afraid of what they're going to hear when it's silent.
Yeah.
But what you hear when it's silent is actually a good thing. Like, God wants you to hear that. He wants you to deal with it. He wants to go through that with us. And one of the ways that I've practiced it in the past, I don't do this near as often just because I'm in this season with like the kids and their lack of sleeping habits. But one of the ways that I was doing it before was this almost Zen-like feeling when I'd go out for a run. And sometimes I'd go out and listen to music, but sometimes it was just the most powerful for me, not the actual workout, but the spiritual space that I'd find myself in when all I could hear like my steps and my breath. With the exception of like cars passing by or just like hearing nature. But those were moments where deep inside of my mind, I could just, for 30 minutes or however long I ran for, I could just deal with some of the things that I was afraid to come to the silence for. And I'm super hyperactive. So if I try to just sit down and have silence, like either my body's going to distract itself or I'm going to want to like pick up a device or pick up something or look at something like. But getting out on the run, like I'm using my motor skills and my mind is given permission to just go, hey, let's dig into this stuff and like think about this for 30 minutes. And most of the time, the mind and the spiritual workout was way better than like the physical. I'd never really cared about the physical. Sometimes I just go out for a run because it's like my mind and my spirit, like my spirit needs it. So. Yeah, I haven't in the past been super like afraid of silence a whole lot, but
Donnie was going to say something there. I was waiting for it.
do you go out for runs too?
No, but I do think about the analogy we were talking about with the Boston Marathon, because then even in the moment where you say, okay, I've done the healing, I've gotten the surgery, I've done the physical therapy, I've done the rehab, I've done the training, but like running the Boston Marathon sucks. Like, if we're honest, like it's not,
it's suffering, baby.
It's fun,
Yeah.
but
It's
it
not pleasant.
doesn't feel good. And so even then, this idea that we can escape suffering, I think, is a lie that we like to tell ourselves. That if we can just, if I can just get here, then we'll be fine.
Well, yeah. What's the lie that people say? Like, well, if God's so good, then why is there bad things in the world? Why are there? And it's actually kind of a false question that we start to ask even in faith. That we act like God only wants good things for us, and He wants us to be happy, and He wants us to feel. He wants us to be. God wants you to be a zero. He wants you when they ask you where are you at. I am a smiley face.
I'm blessed and highly favored.
I'm blessed and highly favored.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Too blessed to be stressed. I can't complain. God loves me, and that's enough.
Yeah. Why is God doing
Wow.
this bad thing to me? I don't know. Why did God give you a huge raise and bonus last year? Well, that's different. That was me.
That's much different.
Okay.
We kind of touched on it a little bit, but I just kind of want to see if this gives you guys like an additional thought. But so in your message, Sheldon, you say, so often the greatest practices do not begin in perfection, but in discipline.
Yeah.
And I think very often, I hear this very often from people who are wrestling with like either next steps in faith or especially like first steps in faith. Like, I've heard people say like, I'm not sure that I'm ready to commit to this. Like, I'm not sure that I'm like all in yet. And I think sometimes we approach we approach spiritual disciplines with the same thing. Like, if I can't practice solitude perfectly the way that I've seen somebody else practice it or the way Jesus did, like I have 3 going on 4 kids here pretty soon. Like, I can't practice silence and solitude.
Right.
Like, to Donnie's point, like it's not necessarily about everybody practicing the same way, but like what little spaces are you creating availability to get onto the path of silence for? So what do you guys think about the perfection versus like it's there's a reason they call it a discipline.
Well, and discipline's a bit of a misnomer. It really is spiritual practice, because I think discipline we always have a negative association with.
I have to do this.
I have to do this, right? But yeah, I'm interested what you guys think before I get the definitive answer.
I've this actually was probably 2 years ago now. I was just doing kind of monthly counseling, just as like soul care, serving in ministry. So it's one of those things of you can't give what you don't have, and if you have your own gunk in your life, you can't really help others. And the counselor put to language for me what I believe the answer to this is, and I think family of origin has a lot to do with it. So my family of origin on both sides, it's about perceived success. So it's not about whether I could actually drive a bike super well, for instance. It's about you believing that I can drive the bike well enough or really good. And it's really all I have to do is drive it good enough around you to make you think that I'm really cool and really good and really awesome. And so that can lead into then, well, if I'm not able to practice it perfectly, then I just don't want to do it at all, because then if I look really dumb because I can't do it well, then you're going to think that I'm less than because I care about the perceived idea of success. So I think that might be the case for some other families, like my wife's family. She's like, no, just do the thing and you're going to be terrible at it. And I'm like, I don't think you know how that works. I don't know how to do that. And so it's something that I've had to learn over time, is that you're not going to be perfect. And that's actually the sign of growth, not just going in and being
So is that kind of a little bit the opposite of like, you hear everybody say all the time with like kids like, oh, practice makes perfect. It's like, no, I had a coach, but also a professor that would say like, hey, just the same way that you go to like cross country practice, like when you're practicing these spiritual disciplines, you're not practicing for perfection. You're practicing for permanence. You're practicing for creating a habit, for creating a rhythm in your life. So much so that the same way that like when I didn't run the Boston Marathon, I chose the Chicago Marathon instead, because it's the flattest course in the world almost. But when I started practicing for that and training, it got to the point where toward the end of training, if I would skip too many days and then come back to it, like not just my body could sense it, but like my mind knowing that I wasn't running that day, or I couldn't run that day because I was like sick or something, I felt off. So now my rhythm had flip-flopped, where it's like before I was like, oh man, why am I doing this? And then toward the end of it, it became such a habit in a very rhythmic practice that I was like, why am I not doing this? Like, this is bothering me that I'm not doing this. And I really think that as people get into rhythms of hopping on that path with God, the more and more you do that as a practice that creates this rhythm in your life, each time that they choose, or they're maybe for some context forced to not get on the path on a particular day, I think the point where you know that something is changing in your life is the point where you're not able to hop on the path into encounter with God, and you go, this is actually bothering me that I can't hop on the path.
Yeah, I think we're afraid of failure a lot of times. I think we're confronted with that because we want the best result that we can possibly get with the minimum amount of effort that we can put into it.
Right.
I see this a lot with younger generations specifically. They think that they have to be perfectionists at everything that they pick up. And if they even get one little thing wrong, then it's like, well, we failed totally.
Yeah.
And I've always counsel my son Josh all the time, and I tell him, look, if you failed, it's not like you didn't do something. You learned a way not to do something. Right. That's what failure really is.
I think that there's this thread, and I mentioned this, and I don't know if I mentioned this in the sermon, I think I do, about kind of there's a difference between being passive and being patient.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes what we do is when we can't be perfect, we become passive rather than being patient. When a kid gets a bike,
the
first time that they ride it, they cannot ride it
Yeah.
And so if we just throw the bike away and say, well, that's it, I just can't ride a bike, or the first time you go for a swimming lesson or whatever else, you know, I couldn't finish the marathon, so I don't get my 26.2 sticker for my back window. So
you can actually buy those at the
my favorite
store.
one is my favorite one is the 0.0. I think that one's my kind of
Built
sticker.
for feed, baby, not
Built
speed.
for feed, not speed.
Yep.
But the reality is, I think that we have this perception of you've got to be awesome at it. Like you ever watch these fun YouTube videos where people do these crazy, ridiculous things. The ones that I like the most, even when you're doom scrolling, is the ones that tells you how many hours it took them to actually get there. And you're
and
like,
how many attempts? Yeah.
42 hours. Who's got 42 hours?
Right.
You know, I want to watch the 8-second video. But and not that that's somehow some discipline, but it's kind of what engaging in a practice and realizing that you're like the first time you do silence, you're going to realize how bad you are at it,
Yep.
how your mind is flooded with the wrong things, and it's going to give you a path of, okay, so if I continue to do this, what do I believe I will learn or will get better over time? I think people think I'm going to be silent for 30 minutes. I'm going to come out. I'm going to have a halo.
Yes.
My kids are going to go to bed on time. And it's it's the opposite.
There's so many things in life that we could apply the same way and people understand it. But then when it comes to some spiritual disciplines and practices, I think that we go like, what? We almost don't understand it. But that's like case in point. Like, like if Brian practiced 30 minutes of silence every day and I'm just starting out, sometimes we are convinced that, oh, so-and-so does it, like I need to do 30, and then you try it and it's awful and almost it ends up being for you something that was way more negative than positive because you're not, you haven't learned it. You haven't learned it yet. It hasn't become like a custom. It's just like in my background in running, one of the ways that I was coached to run was by listening to your body. And the best way that you can start out doing that is running with some people that get really into running. One thing that people do is they use like a heart rate monitor, and you basically run at a specific heart rate. And you try to keep it there. And what I would learn is sometimes I would go out and I would be running at an 8-minute mile pace, and my heart rate would be somewhere around like 130. But then the next day I go out, and if I'm running an 8-minute mile pace, my heart rate is at like 160. And what the monitor is telling me is like, hey, run at 130, and it doesn't matter if you drop it down, if you up it to like 845 per mile. But what I've learned how to do now is I don't need the heart rate monitor now.
Right.
I can feel my body. And when I look down at my watch, I'd be like, oh, like I feel the same, but I'm 30 minutes or I'm 30 seconds slower per mile. Or sometimes it's like you're 30 seconds faster, and it's like, just keep with it. Just like listen to your body.
Yeah.
And you don't get there until you start slow and then listen to your body and your spirit. And there's still challenges with it. You're not like creating it like super easy, but to do moments like this in the same.
And that's why I love we're using the word practice here. You know, I'm a sports guy, so before we would go out and we'd play a game, we would have a practice. And what you're doing is you're engaging with something, you're trying something. And I think with silence, it's important to step into the practice of that and just try it out. You're not going to be perfect at it the first time. You're not going to go 3-4 hours, you know, in silence. You're not going to be able to do that. Right. But the more you do it, the more consistent you are about it, the more you schedule that regular time to do that, you're going to get better and better and better at it because you're practicing the spiritual discipline of it.
I would, if I were breaking it down into phases, and I got kind of two things. The one is this: we start with spiritual practice, which leads to spiritual training, which leads to spiritual discipline. Training, we want to jump into discipline, or we want to jump into training. There's a time when you just need like, hey, why don't you just see how big why don't you just run from one side of the field to the other just to get a feel for how big the field is?
Yeah.
Okay. That's not a training thing. That's just oh, wow, this is, it's longer than I thought it was. You know, oh, that's big. Wow, I didn't realize that. So we start with practice. The other thing is this: we think personal prayers they grow out of personal space. That's not what happens with the disciples. The disciples go to Jesus and they say, hey, we don't know how to do this. Can you teach us how to do this?
Right.
And he's like, well, why don't we start with this?
Yeah.
And find people that have been in faith a little longer than you, and walk with somebody in accountability. Hey, Donnie, I've never really prayed before. I'm going to try the silence. Hey, I keep falling asleep every time I'm silent. I sit down and I'm like, I'm just going to be silent. The next minute I'm like, hey, awesome. you get it. You're resting in the Lord, or you're being quiet. So find somebody that maybe is one category above you. Like if you're starting, find somebody that's trained in this a bit, or that's disciplined in this, and ask them and have some back and forth. That'll be valuable as well.
So even a practice like silence doesn't have to be individual or private. This could be something that is, to some extent, like communal.
It is.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that's what we miss about the beauty of the church. The church is like a training ground.
Yeah.
You know, the reason why we serve at church is not to say I serve.
Right.
It's to teach us in a protected environment how to do it in the world. We don't give a church. We don't tie the church to go, I'm a generous person. No.
Yeah.
We do that to say, hey, watch what happens in this controlled environment with spiritual people so that you can live a generous life. And I think sometimes we treat these practices as the end of things, and they really are just opening the door. The disciples don't really pray well throughout the Gospels.
No.
They probably do after Jesus leaves.
Yeah.
Peter's up on the Peter's up on the
Is that
roof.
because it's gone from practicing with Jesus to now they're in training, and then eventually you've got a mature
becomes the
discipline to pray?
Right.
Gotcha.
Make disciples who they become the thing that they've seen and the thing that they've practiced, even though they're horrible about it. I mean, Peter can't get 2 words right in the Gospels before Jesus is getting on to him, but he preaches the sermon at Pentecost. So what happened? The practice was very messy and imperfect at the beginning. And even after it happened, he still made mistakes, but he was willing to kind of walk with somebody who helped him through that. And so silence is not always it might be that you have this conversation with your spouse and you say, listen, I know we got 3 kids.
Yeah.
I'm going to walk up and down the street. I just need 10 minutes. And they can give you space to do that as well. So these things are, they're very imperfect. And the first time you do them, if it's a dumpster fire, you're on the right track.
You're on the right track.
Right. So
it's working.
yeah, the first few times you do it, it's just more a recognition of how lacking and bad and broken it is. And then once you kind of just accept, okay, this is going to be rough, but you have the tenacity to keep doing it, it'll become
I remember
transformative.
2 weeks after I had I did finish the Chicago Marathon. Started out great. The second half of it was brutal, but I finished. And then 2 weeks later, I took a 2-week break, just because I at that point running was more spiritual for me than it was physical. But I took a 2-week break, and after 2 weeks, how my body felt was no different than day 1 of starting my marathon, like training and planning. And it's crazy. It's a new season to build up again. And I don't think that's necessarily true of like our spiritual walk. So you take 2 weeks off of prayer and silence and you go back to square one, but you are going to have seasons where practices are going to change. They're going to evolve, and it's all refining and shaping like who we are. So yeah, this has been great. If anybody's viewing on YouTube or Facebook, what I want to ask you guys to do is just leave a comment. How you guys maybe have found a good practice of silence. Kind of have that conversation in the comments. But thank you for viewing, for watching, for listening, for watching, whichever one that you're doing. And join us next week. We're going to talk about, public faith and private faith, and why those two are separate, but why they're also sometimes together. So awesome.